I'm Stan Ellsworth. You might have heard me talking about history on American Ride. But today, I want to talk about the United States Constitution, how it came to be, why it came to be, and what makes the United States Constitution a revolutionary document even today. So throttle up, baby. Let's hear the story. The American Civil War was originally fought to preserve the Union. But over the course of that war, we came to some realizations that things needed to change for the Declaration of Independence to really mean anything. The 13th Amendment, passed in 1864, finally abolished the practice of slavery in the United States of America forever. At last, the phrase, "all men are created equal," has real meaning. The 14th Amendment guarantees that people who are born in the United States or naturalized a citizen will not have their rights of citizenship infringed by any state. And the 15th Amendment guarantees that one of those rights, the right to vote, will never be infringed because of your race, your color, or previous condition of servitude. Now, really what it's saying is, hey, for you people that can't figure out number 14, let me spell it out for you. The 15th Amendment is really the beginning of the civil rights movement. It's a question we've been dealing with for over 100 years. Sadly, in the 1890s, we made that decision, Plessy v. Ferguson, separate but equal. We made some terrible missteps. But in the 1950s, with the decision Brown v. Board, we started to bring things around the right way. And with the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s and leaders like Dr. King, we made some great strides. But sadly, it's still a question we're wrestling with today. Now, during the Progressive Era, that time in American history we call the Gilded Age, we fundamentally changed the Constitution. With the 16th Amendment, we changed our tax structure. You see, originally the idea was the federal government would fund itself through tariffs. That's taxes basically on imports and exports. And if the government ever found it needed to tax the citizens directly, it had to put forward a budget that guaranteed how much would be taken, how much would be spent, and when the tax would end. But with the passage of the 16th Amendment in 1913, the federal government no longer was accountable to the people for taxation. We created the federal income tax and the IRS. And the government grew out of all proportion. Under the original idea, the tariff system kept the government small. The income tax system that we have today allows the government access to more money than the founders and framers ever intended. Then there's the 17th Amendment, passed in 1913, where we actually changed the composition of the Senate. As you remember, senators represent the states, not the people. But in 1913, we made sure that they were popularly elected. Senators were supposed to be elected by their state legislators or appointed by their governor. Now they're directly elected by the people. Senators were supposed to do the work of the states and not be affected by popular whim of the day. Now the senators are beholden to the people and to the party. They spend their time campaigning, not doing the work of government. And most importantly, when the senators became popularly elected, it silenced the voice of the states in the working of the federal government. The 18th Amendment was the first time that the federal government really tried to legislate morality. See, there'd been temperance movements and temperance leagues around for a long time, and they were preaching the good word that alcohol, the demon rum, was the cause of all Americans' problems. It was the reason why there were unwed mothers, families without fathers. It was the cause of hooliganism, people running rampant in the streets. And if we got rid of liquor, all the problems in America would dry up. Well, with the Volstead Act, that would be the 18th Amendment, the federal government decided that America was done with booze. It read that No longer in America would we manufacture, distill, import, export, own liquor. America was done with alcohol, and it was a pretty dry place. Which is kind of odd when you think that the father of our country, George Washington, in his day, was one of the best distillers of fine spirits anywhere in the nation. It's like Ben Franklin said, you can't legislate morality, but you can teach responsible behavior. Now, the Volstead Act had an unintended consequence. It created a black market in alcohol that funded criminal enterprise in America well into the 20th century. The 19th Amendment to the Constitution is the last of the progressive era. What it says is, basically, no citizen of the United States can have the right to vote abridged or impeded in any way because of sex. Or words to that effect. What it means is, women finally had the vote. We had denied that right to half of our population for 150 years. Finally, women had that right. If they were to suffer under the laws of the land, then they ought to have a voice in how they're made. Now, to be fair, you have to understand that at the get-go, only 15% of white men could vote. It took almost 30 years before all white men could vote. Then it took another 40 years for all men to vote. Then it took 50 more years for women to have the same rights as men. But at last, every citizen of the United States truly stood equal under the law. We'll see you next time for the Constitution and the New Deal. Subscribe now. It's history with attitude and the American story with an edge.